Yeah, we'd love to see it, guys. Ed Reform. Ed Reform in the morning. Glad to see the crowd so excited. My name is Brian Dijkema. I'm the Canadian president of Cardus. Cardus is a think tank that does lots of work on a variety of things, including education. And it's my privilege, my honor to be up here talking about education reform with this great panel that we have in front of us. I'm going to just do a brief set of introductions, then we're going to get into the conversation. To my right here is Paige MacPherson. Paige is yes, well known probably to most of you. Paige is the Associate Director of Ed Policy at the Fraser Institute. She's got all the data. We're going to start with her actually in the questions, but it's going to be great. To her right is my colleague Joanna van Hoff. She's the Program Director for Education at Cardus. She's also deep in the belly of the Ed establishment. She's doing a PhD at OISE in Toronto, which is great. And she's the author of many papers on the educational sector, educational systems, and the diverse nature of education in Canada. Some hard-nosed data, and I'm hoping you'll share some of that. To her right is Caylan Ford. Caylan Ford, let's give Caylan a hand. Look at you. Caylan is a scholar, founder of a school. I've learned backstage also a Lord of the Rings aficionado. We were having debates about the text and education, all that stuff in the back. She is a slandered politician, but she has sort of taken that and has actually turned it into something good. And Caylan, I actually think you're one of the more interesting people doing something real and substantive in education in Canada, so I'm honored that you can join us here. To her right is an American friend.
I come in peace.
His name is Derrel Bradford. He's the president of 50CAN, which has nothing to do with 51st states or anything like that. I actually like to think of it as like 50 can be Canada, if you want.
Can.
You can be Canada. And 50CAN is an organization that trains and recruits leaders across the country, across the United States, those 50 can. To advocate for better education for American children. And Derrel is a longtime friend, somebody I met in DC when I had more hair. And he didn't, though. So Derrel, thanks so much for coming up here to Canada and for being part of this. So Paige, I'm going to start with you. We have a context here in Canada, and I will say this to the conservative movement, where education is basically a non-issue. There are some people like Cardus, some people like Caylan, Paige, and others doing work in the education sector, but when you see governments, when you see campaigns, you see very little focus on education reform. And there's a sense in which we just are going along to get along. And we're seeing, I would say, some of the results of that. You see that in the declining scores on children's education. I think you have that challenge with, shall we call, civic education, knowledge of Canadian history, also knowledge of the things that drive us. The things that public schools are supposed to do are failing. And we often hear that, well, they're failing because there's not enough money. We hear this every time. If only we funded the system well or better, we'd have better outcomes. What do you make of that claim?
Well, so yeah, absolutely. First of all, I totally agree with your first point, which is that we've sort of ceded ground on this issue and just don't adopt it. And I think that is something that it needs to change because there is such a common sense component to this, that parents who have their kids in schools know that it's not as good as it maybe used to be or as clear as it used to be. It's not as good as it could be or should be. It doesn't work for so many kids, and yet you don't see substantive, meaty policy reform put forward, certainly at the political level, and so I think that is something that we should think more deeply about. In terms of the spending numbers, so in 21-22, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, there's $82.5 billion were spent on public schools, so government public schools in Canada. That is a really significant chunk of change with which we could be doing so much. And you started a small school. Caylan, you started a school. You can see that when people are innovative and they're starting schools, you don't need an enormous amount of money. you can do a lot of really amazing things with initiative and good ideas, and yet we're spending this really large chunk of change on Canadian government public schools, and things are not going so well. Unfortunately, our spending also, just to give, to make this clear, nationally speaking, in terms of the average per student inflation-adjusted spending is increasing. It's going up year after year. So the problem is not that we are not spending enough. We are spending more every year, but we are not getting good results in terms of the trajectory. So when we look at our PISA scores, the Program for International Student Assessment, which is a sort of generally well-regarded skills standardized test of 15-year-olds that happens internationally, our results are declining. Over the last 2 decades, speaking of our national average, kids are about 2 years behind in math where they were in terms of their math competency or how well they're doing in math on that test. They're about 2 years behind over the last 2 decades. In terms of their reading scores, they're about a year behind. So they've fallen behind quite a bit. This is not a COVID thing. The school closures were extremely unhelpful, but that's not the reason. It predated COVID school closures, just to be clear. But there's other things that are happening in schools that we know, right? There's increasing violence against students and teachers. There's politicization. Kids are going to anti-Israel marches through their government public schools. Like, there's a whole bunch of different issues and reasons why things are not going so well outside of the academics as well. But I guess my point is that spending, increasing the amount that we're spending, is not going to make things better. Which is kind of unfortunate, because if that was just an easy answer, we could throw more money at it and that would improve things. But we actually did at the Fraser Institute a fairly comprehensive analysis looking at the data on OECD countries and spending and performance. And it basically found that if you're a high-income OECD country like Canada, spending more does not equal stronger student achievement. It just doesn't. If you're a low-income country, okay, yes, more money is needed, more resources are needed, it can help. The level we're at, it's just not the case. So when we're spending more on things like teachers' compensation, which is the biggest expenditure across the board when it comes to government public schools in Canada, but our student performance is declining. And so what that means is that we're gonna need to figure something else out. If we believe that children's education is important for the future success of our country, then spending more money, throwing more money at the problem is not going to improve things. And we're going to I know we're going to talk more about different policies that maybe can improve that, but we're going to need to figure those things out and put those forward, because more money is not the answer.
Can I add one thing to that, just because it's a killer fact? So I work in New York and in New Jersey and the nation to the south. In New York, we're spending $36,000 on average a kid. In Canadian dollars today, adjusted for the current tumultuous financial environment, that is 50,647 Canadian dollars a child. So I just want to highlight this number to kind of like bolster Paige's point, and also say that if you hear somebody say fully fund, get the holy water out and throw it on them.
Right.
Get somebody to give you an actual figure in one of these conversations, and what you'll find is that there is no actual figure.
No, that's right. It's a receding horizon that always gets higher and higher. And Derrel is, one of my favorite lines from Derrel was during COVID, and people are saying, well, what should we do? And Derrel says, like, fund it all. And you were talking about not just the state schools, which is what Paige is talking to, which is the dominant mode of education in Canada. We have not yet caught up into a pluralist vision. So that's why I want to go to you, Joe. You study, Joanna studies educational structures. We're talking here basically, we're funding something, we're giving more money to something that's actually getting worse over time. All of us can see it. Those of us who have kids in that system, many of us have left, started our own schools. I will say, by the way, that there are 4 out of 5 people on this panel are on school boards, have started a school or on one that is either independent or charter. And I think that's actually, and Paige is going to get one going in Halifax.
I'm really behind here.
5 out of 5, we're going for 5 out of 5. But Joe, what would system change look like? Not just giving more money, not just like keeping the same thing going and doing the same thing over and over again, banging your head against the wall. What would actual structural change look like? And what are some of the myths that are associated with that we might need to pay attention to?
Sure, thanks. It's wonderful to be here. I think, well, a different vision for structural reform is really actually something that is really exciting. Like, it's just a much more exciting vision to me than doing the same thing repeatedly and hoping for different results, which is, unfortunately, as Paige just enlightened us, not the case. So in my work, I focus a lot on educational pluralism. And the definition of educational pluralism, you can think of it as actually just structurally choice by design. There's a definition that a scholar, Ashley Berner, who is a Cardus Senior Fellow, provides, that educational pluralism are systems in which the government both funds and regulates schooling, but does not deliver the education. And this is the norm, actually, in many democratic, particularly Western democratic countries around the world. So countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, Australia, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the UK, all have systems of varying degrees of pluralism. Probably the Netherlands, it would be the gold standard. It funds, I think, 36 different kinds of schooling. So less than 20% of students in the Netherlands would attend what we would consider to be your kind of secular public schooling model of schooling. So structurally, choice is inherent in a system. It's also not something that is seen as an option against what is the norm of public schooling. It's embedded within a foundational understanding that choice matters. The reason that it matters is because education is really, it's impossible for education to be morally neutral. And we need systems in which, if we are democratic countries and we care about the diversity that exists within the population, in which our schooling reflects that diversity. And so it flips the structure of education really from systems where they're more uniform, and then the content that is taught is more eclectic, or there are more eclectic approaches, and the pressure exists on teachers really to meet the diverse needs in the classroom, to a system in which some of that diversity is carried by the school, and then teachers themselves actually feel less pressure, I think, because they're given a structure in which to work and collegial frameworks in which to operate according to a particular school culture. And we know from data that school culture and student success are highly correlated. So the stronger the school culture, the more likely there is for students to really succeed. We also know from international comparative data that systems in which educational pluralism is the model are systems in which there is high achievement. There's fantastic economic data by German economist Ludger Wassmann on sort of the effect of a private market or of autonomy of schools within a system, and the impact of that on student success. So I think educational pluralism models, they do at least three things. They will shift power and decision-making away from centralized bureaucratic systems toward school communities and the families they served. So this is a more localized vision of education. It, as I mentioned earlier, it alleviates the pressure on teachers and educators to be all things to all students, and gives them a vision of education, corresponding structure in which to work. And ultimately, it doesn't just pay lip service to meeting the diverse needs of students, but it actually provides substantive options together with the funding and access to them. So both the availability of the options and the access to the options are really important factors in systems of educational pluralism. And so I think Canada itself, to get to some of the myths that you were talking about, has a strong history of educational pluralism. Our constitutional history does build some choice into our systems across most provinces. We can get into what that looks like in different provinces, because I think there are really cultural differences. Alberta's a province, a wonderful province in which choice is a more normative idea. across the board than, say, in Ontario, where I think the choice that does exist has become more conformist. And I think there are many reasons for that. But we have to break some of the myths of I think, the zero-sum school choice debates and the idea that school choice is actually a partisan issue. Maybe Derrel can even talk a little bit about this, because there's also, I think, a real substantive history of choice that also exists in civil rights and human rights movements. So this is not a partisan issue. It has nonpartisan support in many other countries around the world, and a rich history also. But in terms of some of those myths, like, we know on the ground that Ontario, like, school choice is not just for the elite and the wealthy. In Ontario, only 4% of what we would consider top tier or elite schools are 4% of schools are really those top tier and elite schools. So, and that's 15% of student enrollment. So the vast majority are either religious or special emphasis, we would call them. Like, so they have a particular pedagogical approach, like a Montessori orientation, or Waldorf, or classical schooling, or some other innovative approach to education that parents can opt into. In Alberta, those numbers are, I believe, 8% of schools would be considered your top tier wealthy schools, and that would translate to about 14% enrollment.
This is among private schools?
Yes.
Yeah.
Among private schools, yes. Yeah. We know, for example, that in Alberta, 1.5, parents who choose independent schools are 1.5 times more likely than the average to be below average income earners. So these are not all choices that are made by those who are wealthy and elite. And so that's really the work that exists, I think, on the ground, is to counter some of the really prevailing myths that do exist.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you're talking about those low-income families being disproportionately represented in the independent school movement is actually a reflection of what education could and should be. It's the place where you want to learn, to grow. It's a place of opportunity and to be shaped to be the type of person that can succeed. And that sort of gets to, I think, the next two speakers, Caylan and Derrel, the notion that you're not just, there's something deeper going on with education. It's not simple, you alluded to it, Joe, when you said there's no morally neutral education. What you're doing is you're forming kids.
Yes.
So Caylan, you've started a classical school, you started 2, I've 3. Wow. This is an overachiever. I've only started 1 school. I'm feeling so inadequate at this point.
You beat him up on Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and she did own me in the Lord of the Rings debate earlier as well. That's okay.
We
it's
can
okay.
just turn this into a debate.
I'm confident, man. Caylan, tell us a little bit though. I know teachers at your schools. I've seen some of your schools. They're actually lots of new Canadians, lots of very poor people, and yet they're going to a school that's classical. They're studying Plato, they're reading Thucydides, they're reading sort of the big books of our civilization. Why is that so attractive? And why, maybe answer that to start with, but why do you think, if we talk about education reform, it's not got to be just at the system level, but at the curriculum level in terms of what we're teaching and how we're forming children? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the topic, the name of this panel was something like Education Back to Basics or something. Right. And I always sort of shudder when I hear that phrase in the mouths of politicians, because I don't know what they mean by it, but we can do that. Let's go back to basics. So 2,500 years ago, in the dying days of the Zhou dynasty, is where Confucius lived. So this is the Warring States period, and he's surveying his country and seeing it fall into ruin. So civilization is on the decline. And he has an almost mythical belief that he has a mission to try to restore the sources of moral order and restore civilization. So he's kind of known as China's great teacher, but insofar as he was a teacher, it's actually because he failed as a politician. And he was traveling around with a coterie of sort of ministers in waiting, trying to find the ruler of a state who would entrust him with its administration. And more often than not, he ended up fleeing assassination attempts and so on, because his competence, I think, put the rulers in negative relief. But he was asked once, well, if you were put in charge of the state of Wei in this case, what would be the first thing that you would do? And he said, But surely it would be to rectify the names. And his disciple Zulu asked, well, why would you rectify the names? And Confucius was rarely expressed annoyance, but on this occasion he was very annoyed, and he said, Zulu, how boorish can you be? If names don't correspond with reality, then language is without object. And if language is without object, then no affair can be affected. Music and rights will wither, justice or punishments will miss their mark, and people won't know where they stand. So in the spirit of rectifying the names, which should be the first task of any politician, I think, well, let's look at the words that we're using here. We talk a lot about school and we talk about education. So education derives from the Latin educere, which means to draw out, to extract. And so what are we drawing students out of, and what are we leading them towards? And I think in answering that question, it's helpful to go back to the original academy in the glade of Academos, where Plato formed his school. And going to the parable of the cave, that's the imagery that comes to mind, right? And so I'm sure everyone is familiar with this, but just as a recap, the parable of the cave there's inside a cave, there's a low wall, and to it, people are bound. Their legs and their necks are bound to the wall, and they're facing the opposite wall of the cave. And behind that low wall is a fire, sort of perpetually blazing. And then there are people who have various little objects, vases and figurines of people and animals that they pass over the wall, casting shadows. And so the prisoners, their entire reality consists of observing these shadows, or simulacra, or sort of counterfeits of reality that are projected onto the wall. And this is very enticing to them because they have nothing else. And so they accord honors to their peers based on their ability to, say, predict what's going to happen next with the shadows on the wall. For those of us who are very consumed day to day with politics, this may be familiar. And then one day, one of these people is sort of forcibly unshackled and lifted up and turned around. And this is very painful initially, because if you've only ever been accustomed to dark, seeing the light of the fire it's sort of dazzling to the eyes. And then he's drawn out of the cave and up into the sunlight. And this is more painful and more dazzling still. But there, this person encounters the actual source of light, the source of being. So it's a vision of the agathon. This is the moment of the opening of the soul. And this is what education means. It's not to make people more sort of sharp or keen-eyed as they stare at the projections or the shadows on the wall. It's an act of turning the soul around to face the actual source of reality. And this project obviously is predicated on the idea that there is an ultimate reality, that there are transcendent truths that are given. So, we're at our school, we're very much moral realists. We reject this idea that everyone has his or her own truth and, beauty's in the eye of the beholder and all of that, because that produces sort of teleological incoherence and a kind of chaos. So you have to believe that there's a real truth towards which you're trying to orient the soul. And then the second word that I think is worth rectifying in this conversation is school, which comes from the Greek skole. And I asked recently a group of people from Alberta's Ministry of Education if they knew what this word meant, and they have no idea. It means leisure. And leisure is not it's not the absence of work. I think for a definition of leisure, I would paraphrase Joseph Pieper, that leisure is basically a contemplative, still state of mind. It's receptive, and it is the prerequisite to the apprehension of reality. And only in this kind of silence, only with this capacity for inner silence, can people actually participate fully in reality. So it's something that allows us to transcend the workaday world and reach toward those sort of, refreshing, superhuman, eternal sources that actually give substance and meaning to our lives. And in the grand scheme of things, when we think about the purpose of education, this is the veil of soul making. Conservatives need to care about this. We often, everyone's heard the cliche that politics is downstream of culture. It's not entirely true. I think it's more of accurately described as a reciprocal, mutually reinforcing relationship. But to the extent that it's true that politics is downstream of culture, culture is downstream of education. And I think the left understands this. They have for decades, hence your long march through the institutions. Conservatives need to do much better than merely advocating for sort of value-neutral choice. I think choice is a means to an end. Freedom is a means to an end. It's not your ultimate good. And we need to be concerned about the kinds of souls that are being shaped through this system of education and whether they're ultimately turned the right way toward reality, toward participation and being.
Yeah, let's do that. Just a quick follow-up there, Caylan. I think part of what we'll need to do is there needs to be a reevaluation of some of the language and some of the priorities that we hear about. I often hear when I'm talking to conservative politicians, it's like, schools for good jobs. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I love work. I'm a good Dutchman. But there's a sense in which, there's almost a sort of the quality of Solomon, right? There's a sense in which the kids who are formed well, who are taught to be wise, in the sense that you're alluding to, but what does life actually mean? What is the world actually? Are the ones who are most likely also to be the ones who are best workers. Like my children go to a small classical and Charlotte Mason school. Charlotte Mason is one of the most underrated education writers of all time and educators of all time, and they do logic. And they do logic at that school. And I look at that logic, and 9 times out of 10, I don't know what the hell is going on. But what's fascinating is they're doing logic to understand coherence and A plus B equals C. There's a sort of sequence there. They understand the way the world goes, which is useful for science, for understanding more about science. What's fascinating is that's also the basis of coding. So most schools these days will put a Chromebook in front of a kid and have some game where you're coding. It doesn't actually teach them how to do that. All it teaches them how to do is use an interface. And I feel that's a bit of a metaphor for where we're at. And so how would you, you've just given us a chat about Plato and Confucius, which is very impressive. But how do you talk to a civil servant who has no clue about this? Where do you start when it comes to sort of switching that narrative?
I'd start by talking about Plato.
Okay.
So look, our school, for example, we talk about the liberal arts. And the liberal arts people, I think this is another term that is often misunderstood. The liberal arts involves the quadrivium that Plato elaborated in the Republic. So arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Specifically, music is the study of ratios and harmonies. So it's in that family of almost theoretical maths or sciences. And then it also joins grammar, logic or dialectic, and rhetoric. So those are the traditional 7 liberal arts. It's not what you think of, it's not gender studies or whatever you think a liberal arts major is. And the liberal arts are basically those things that we study because they are emancipatory, they free us. And we study them again in that spirit of contemplative leisure. Plato emphasizes that the guardians of the polis should study these sort of geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, not for their practical utility, but because they draw the soul upward in philosophic contemplation of the order and the harmony of the cosmos. And so these are very much aristocratic sort of undertakings. We do them for the love of wisdom and no other reason. And so this would give rise to the question, well, but you also need to know how to do real stuff, right? We're embodied people. We should know how to do things in the world. We should be able to make useful contributions to our community and contribute to the common weal. Absolutely. But I think it's a question of putting first things first. And if you put the first things in the first place, you will get the secondary goods. If you put the secondary goods in the first place, you probably won't get any of them. So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great response.
I think, can I just,
yeah,
I really appreciate everything that you are adding to this discussion, Caylan, because I think one of the objectives of more pluralist models is also the ability of students not just to be formed and then as a secondary good to be able to engage democratically across lines of disagreement. So one of the, I think, things that really motivates my work and study is the also reality that when students are well-formed, they are better able to have those conversations. They build the resilience and the capacities in order to do this. And so we know that we are living in an age, a particular moment, where polarization is incredibly real and where it's increasingly difficult to have these conversations, and we've lost the muscle, really, in many ways, to engage well. And so in order to resolve, I think, some of those tensions, we have to be able to view education as a core process towards overcoming that polarization. So Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I actually want to point out some of the data from work that we've done, which was one of the myths of independent schools is that they basically are political hotbeds for partisanship, right? And what's fascinating is the data don't show that at all. What the data show actually, that children who go to independent schools tend to be much more involved in their communities through volunteering, through charitable giving, through involvement in other associations within their community, and it actually disproportionately less involved in partisan politics. And so there's a sense in which these kids are actually building the civil fabric of the country, not just being trained to go knock on doors for the blue or the orange or the red team. And I find that really, really fascinating. I want to ask, Derrel, you actually do the work of ed reform, and you're on the ground, you train people, and what I find fascinating is, from following you over the years and talking to you, you guys are pretty dead focused on the kid. Like you want to set up a system.
Wow.
I shouldn't have said dead focused on the kid. But you guys are locked in on making education better for the child. And I think part of what you're trying to do is actually realign a structure so that the incentives are in a place where somebody who provides the child education is the thing that's going to get rewarded and so on. And I'd say currently right now, we have a system that incentivizes effectively, I will just say it right, that the teachers' unions are the ones that are the dominant players, and their incentive is themselves, less the kids. So you're doing this hard work of reform every day. You're working with parents, you're working with people across America, and how do you do that work? How do you actually mobilize people? If we buy this vision, the money, we're putting money into a system that's failing, we need actually a pluralist structure and one that's focused on actually bringing the children up to first things first so that they can become real, thoughtful, wise people who are then able to go into the city and create a good, beautiful place. How do you actually build a movement that does that? I would say in Canada, we don't have that movement. We need that movement. So if you're going to give us advice on building that, Derrel, where do we start? What is the thing that we need to hear or do?
First of all, I thought we were friends. This panel would have been great with 3 people. And then following your exposition is like a big deal. So I would just also say that C.S. Lewis says the purpose of education shouldn't be to make more clever devils, which I also think is germane. So a couple of things, with all respect, because like education is highly local and local context is everything. So I just want you to know, I know that the United States is not Canada. So I just want to throw that out there as pretext. I will say that right now in America, conservatives own the education issue, where historically Democrats or liberals, that's what our party structure is, have held the issue. COVID really flipped it, and now it's like within the margin of error. It's nominal, if at all. So there are a couple of ways that we do it. Operationally, what we do is find people who have a powerful vision for the future and support them as they try to build coalitions to make change. And we have 4 sort of approaches to that. One is that you work with elites, right? Which is what I think everybody does. That's probably everybody in this room pretty much. You motivate the people. We call those social movements. So you find folks who want to engage in your idea. In the United States, the civil rights movement is a great example of this. You can work with experts. Certainly the value of expertise is kind of a coin toss right now, but you think about school finance is an area of experts. Lawyers tend to be in that area too. And you can find people who are just doing things out in the field and help them scale. We call that an emergent network. So somebody has a great idea for a school, for instance. I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but in the Houston Independent School District, which is kind of like the 5th biggest district in America, there used to be an African-American woman named Harriet Ball, and she had a very specific way of teaching kids math facts and a whole bunch of other things where she would use little songs and other kind of mnemonics to help kids remember those things. And one day, 2 guys showed up in her classroom, saw what she did, and went out and made a school based on that. And that school is called KIPP, which is the largest charter network in the United States with about 250,000 kids in it. So that is what we would call an emergent network. Those are all the tools that we use. The important things to understand about our system is that and how we work is that, one, we don't think you can sell somebody without a positive vision for the future. So you have to incite the imagination to sort of fight for something that does not exist yet. Like, one of the advantages the status quo has is that it is here, right? That's actually the biggest advantage that it has, is that it is here. So people need to believe that something different is possible. The second thing I would just say is that, like, in the United States, we are constantly doing two things with our education system, and that may or may not be true here as well. One is that we have a set of strategies that we are sort of consistently trying to implement. And the other is that we have a set of sort of societal goals that we'd like to manifest. And they don't always match up with one another. So in the 2000s, when I started working on all of this stuff, you know, we were in what was called the No Child Left Behind era. This was this is an era of a lot of federally directed education policy. It was very bipartisan. It was very top-down. It's when a lot of the groups, like the groups I work for, came into existence. And that was very successful, in part because as a nation, we were like, we're losing the battle for global competitiveness, right, that Reagan highlighted almost 40 years ago and raised in A Nation at Risk. And we have a historic injustice in our system that we need to correct, which is that if you live in the wrong zip code, you're the wrong color, you have the wrong parents, you're very likely not to reach your full potential because you'll go to a school that won't help you do that, you know. And for like 12 or 13 years, we had that, and it really, really worked. Most recently, I would say, and I just point to COVID as kind of the catalyst for a lot of the dynamism that's emerging in the American system right now, you know, we sort of learned the opposite, that we have institutional arrangements that are so deeply self-interested, they'll sacrifice a generation of American citizens for a $190 billion bailout from the federal government, which is money we basically lit on fire. And you know, I was left sort of thinking, we are not a nation who cares very much about our kids, and we are absolutely one that is willing to sort of look the other way when the adult interests are going to be in control, and that is completely unacceptable, right? Just not as just a people, but as a Western nation. And
welcome to Ontario.
So really, yeah. So this is, I mean, by the way, I'm angry about this every day. Our politicians have not taken this seriously, or the downstream effects of it. And so now we're in an era of basically rebellion, which is wonderful, actually. And it's where a lot of the innovations have come from. It's like huge interest in the classics and the basics, I would say, right? We have a burgeoning sector of self-school starters that we call microschools. It's just people who are out there who are like, I'm not waiting anymore. The number of black homeschoolers has tripled. There are 1 million fewer kids going to the school they were zoned for, or any school, basically, than there were a couple of years ago. And like 12 states have passed what we call education savings accounts now, which is probably the most groundbreaking education finance restructuring, because in the end, like, if you can do what you want with the money, anything is possible. If what you can do with the money is limited, what is possible is limited, right? So we're in an era of trying to sort of unwind the harm of the pandemic, and really, to your point about schools not being neutral, reestablish what it means to have cultural institutions that are schooling institutions. And the prior administration, you know, maybe you support it, but well, here maybe nobody supported it. But they absolutely had a view about culture, and it was to atomize and divide us. And whether or not our pluralist approach helps us be more unified is sort of an open question, but I think the evidence is that it will be.
We have about 5-6 minutes left, and so I want to ask each one of you. Derrel, you sort of pointed to, I mean, you just make me jealous. I mean, I hear all of this.
It's the hair, isn't it?
That's the hair. I'm getting there, Derrel. I don't look, my suit's not as nice, but what you do make me jealous, though, not just because you look good, but because when I hear 12 states with ESAs, when I hear, like, you know, parents being able to actually have agency in their, I'm from Ontario, you know, we don't have any of that. Caylan is from Alberta. You got a little bit of that. You got a little taste of it, a little bit there, and it's structurally embedded. Paige is in Halifax. There's none of that there.
Yeah, a comedian came to Halifax and said, I've heard you're a socialist fishing village. It was apt.
Yeah, and so, but there's a sense in which, okay, we can sit here and be jealous and sort of like say, okay, we need you guys to come up here and show us like how to do that. But I want to sort of ask each one of you, and we'll keep it quick. We'll do more of a firing line style. Is that I think everybody's alluded to this, and Derrel, you mentioned it specifically, that to win people over, and I would say to win politicians over too, if you're in the room, if you're a staffer, I want you to be thinking about how do I actually take this and do something with it, rather than just sit and play it safe like we've seen in other places. Get through the next round of collective bargaining, give them a bit more money, but don't do anything to change. How can I actually take this and move for the future? Can each of you say what I think each of us said we needed, which is, what is the imaginative vision? What is the positive vision for a new approach to education in this country? If you can give us your firing line. You've got the minister and her chief of staff for 30 seconds. What do you say? Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll do it quick.
Okay.
So our approach is that the wealthy have this figured out, and we want to build a system that allows everyone to do what they do. So that's kind of the inciting thing. The other part of this too is that, particularly where choice is concerned, is that the ability to choose in and of itself matters. Like, a pluralist system is a manifestation of enabling the individual to pick what is best for them. And that is essential to any sort of accountable, dynamic, diverse system that we might want to have.
Preach.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's right. This is a very polite golf clap crowd. Okay, who's next?
I can go next.
Okay, Paige, take it away.
What I would say to a government in a province like Ontario or a province like Nova Scotia is just do something. Do anything to increase the amount of choice, the access to that choice for families, and build from there. Because everybody in this room knows that you've got friends who their kids are really bright and they're not being challenged, so they're bored and they're acting out at school, or they've got autism, or they've got ADHD and they're falling through the cracks for that reason, or they're like my 7-year-old boy who just needs to be spending more time outside climbing trees so that he can focus better in school. Like, whatever it is, school is not working perfectly well for every kid, for so many kids. You also know that there are so many families that are spending a ton of money on private tutoring outside of school because they're not getting what they need in class, because there's kids that are throwing desks and that's what's taking up the time. And so there is a huge constituency of people out there that care about this. To me, the political argument is in that enormous constituency. Recognize that, and then just try something, whether it's education savings accounts, whether it's emulating the model that exists in Alberta or BC or whatever. Increase choice for families in any way, and then I think you will see that it's not as scary as you think it might be, and it'll build from there. So that would be my pitch.
I love it. I love it. I'm sold. So far, the minister's sold. Okay, Joe.
Yeah, I think similar but to what's been said, but I think I would say build capacities for agency within public district systems and within and outside of those as well, for innovative and new models. Because the capacity for agency really matters. And I think that we have lived for so long feeling as though this is not something that is possible to change. It's too big and it's beyond us. Building capacity for agency, allowing being transparent about information so that parents have the ability to exercise that agency is critical. Also I think, rebuilding some of the trust that is lacking currently in public education. So yeah, I think that's what I would say. And if you want to talk a little more about trust in education, you can head on over to 45 Rideau this afternoon.
Yeah, go ahead.
10 seconds really quickly. I also, because you mentioned teachers' unions being a really powerful stakeholder. That is the unions. It doesn't represent the teachers. Because a lot of teachers are unhappy too, and governments should recognize that as well. So I just wanted to throw that on the table.
That's exactly right. Caylan.
Well, so I'll pick that up. So no dissent from me on the value of pluralism and choice, but to a large extent, this is all for naught if we don't radically overhaul the regulation of the teaching profession and the training of teachers.
100%.
The bachelors of educations are the root of much evil. And just as we want pluralism in where we educate our kids, there should also be alternative ways for teachers to be trained. And so I would say that should absolutely be a priority for any conservative government.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point.
So I just want to underscore Joe's point. We are actually at Cardus doing an open house this afternoon on this very topic. We want you to come. We've got wine, we've got beer, we've got cheese. We are not above bribing you to come, but we want you to come. We want you to network and actually be part of this growing movement that is seeking to reform education in this country. Come, meet one another, learn from one another. 45 Rideau down the street. I said to...
What time,
4:30.
4:30, at 4:30. 4:30, 45 Rideau. I was saying to my friends, I said, this is a banger of a panel, and they have not disappointed. So let's give a round of applause to this wonderful panel here. It's a pleasure.